The Navy called them the Queens of the Fleet. That was not a nickname. That was official, precise language. It appeared in Bureau of Ships publications and fleet communiques. Fleet carriers were considered the most powerful warships ever constructed. They projected air power across hundreds of miles of ocean, launching strikes that could destroy enemy fleets before a single surface gun could respond. The men who served aboard them were part of something historic, something decisive, something that naval planners in 1942 believed represented the pinnacle of American sea power. Recruiting posters displayed, flight decks swept clean, aircraft lined up in perfect rows, the ship cutting through blue water with impossible confidence. What those posters did not show was the inside of Boiler Room 4 on USS Essex in August of 1944, where the air temperature registered 142 degrees Fahrenheit, and men working inside were pouring sweat at a rate that stripped 4 to 6 pounds of fluid from their bodies per watch. They did not show the berthing compartments 5 decks below the waterline, where 3,448 men slept in spaces designed for 2,600, stacked 3 bunks high with 18 inches of vertical clearance per man. They did not show the flight deck crews who lost fingers to spinning propellers and arms to arresting wire failures. They said nothing about what happened aboard USS Bunker Hill on the morning of May 11, 1945, when 2 kamikazes struck within 30 seconds of each other, and 393 men died in a fire that burned for 6 hours without stopping. The Queens of the Fleet. That was the official position. Of the 24 fleet and light carriers the United States Navy commissioned during the Second World War, 12 were struck by enemy action severe enough to require return to stateside shipyards for major repair, and 3 were sunk outright: Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet, before the tide of the Pacific War shifted. Dozens of crew members were killed in operational accidents for every man who died in combat. The men who served aboard these ships, in engineering spaces, on flight decks, in magazines, and in damage control parties experienced something the Bureau of Ships publications never addressed with honesty. A form of sustained physical endurance under conditions that would have been legally unacceptable in any American civilian industry. Recruiting posters showed the ship. They did not show what it cost to keep it alive. The air temperature in those spaces routinely exceeded 130 degrees during normal operations, especially during high-speed runs or combat maneuvers, when the ship was turning into the wind for flight operations while simultaneously evading attack. Temperatures inside Boiler Rooms 1 and 2 on USS Yorktown 2 reached 147 degrees, as recorded in the ship's engineering log from the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June of 1944. You did not volunteer for the engineering spaces. You were assigned there. An Essex-class carrier displaced 27,100 tons fully loaded. She stretched 872 feet from stem to stern. Her flight deck covered 4.1 acres of armored steel. 4 Westinghouse geared turbines drove her through the water at 32.7 knots, fed by 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers operating at 565 degrees and 565 pounds per square inch of steam pressure. Those boilers consumed 1,900 gallons of fuel oil per hour at full speed. The engineering spaces required roughly 300 men working in rotating watches to keep them operational. Each watch in the forward fire rooms, the spaces immediately adjacent to the boilers, lasted 4 hours. Those 1,000 extra men slept somewhere. In practice, they slept in racks stacked so close together that the man in the second tier could feel the springs of the rack above pressing against his forehead. Enlisted berthing compartments on the lower decks of an Essex-class carrier measured approximately 45 by 60 feet, roughly the footprint of a modest suburban house, containing between 150 and 200 racks, arranged in columns of 3. The racks themselves were 72 inches long, 28 inches wide, with canvas stretched across a pipe frame and 22 inches of vertical clearance to the rack above. You could not sit up. The crew complement aboard a typical Essex-class carrier by mid-1944 was somewhere between 3,200 and 3,600 men, depending on the ship's anti-aircraft battery configuration. The designed complement was 2,631, leaving nearly 1,000 additional men. The gap came almost entirely from the expansion of the ship's anti-aircraft armament following the kamikaze threat. An Essex leaving the yard in 1944 might carry 72 40mm Bofors guns in quad and twin mounts, plus between 40 and 60 20mm Oerlikon cannons. Each quad 40mm mount required 11 men to operate at combat effectiveness. The 20mm positions required 2 men each. Ammunition handlers, fire control teams, and loader crews added nearly 1,000 men to a ship that had not grown by a single inch of internal space. You rolled out. The compartment held your rack. A small locker measuring 12 by 18 inches for all personal possessions, and nothing else. No chair, no table, no space to stand upright between columns without pressing your back against someone else's rack or body. Ventilation blowers moved air at a volume adequate for 200 men. There were 350 men trying to sleep in shifts in that same volume. In the South Pacific summer, the ambient temperature in enlisted berthing averaged 96 degrees. The smell, described in dozens of post-war accounts, was something between a gymnasium locker room and a rendering plant. You adapted. Within 72 hours, your olfactory system simply stopped registering the baseline. When you went topside after a week at sea, then came back below, the smell hit you again like something solid, then disappeared. Every man aboard knew this cycle. Nobody discussed it. Showers were officially permitted 3 times per week. In practice, during extended operations, when evaporators ran below capacity or fresh water was diverted to critical systems, showers were suspended entirely for 5 to 10 days. When available, the shipboard system produced a timed flow. Approximately 3 minutes to wet down, soap, and rinse. Water shut off automatically during periods of saltwater rationing. The ship provided saltwater soap, a compound that technically lathered but left a residue on skin that never fully dried in 90% tropical humidity. Men wiped themselves down between shower days with rags dampened from the scuttlebutt. That was the reality of personal hygiene aboard the queens of the fleet. The food was its own chapter. Navy supply doctrine held that carrier crews should be fed at a standard comparable to a good American restaurant. Fleet logistics allocated funds accordingly for the first 8 to 12 days after leaving port, when refrigerated stores held fresh provisions. This claim had some basis in reality. Real eggs, fresh bread, meat that had not been processed into canned loaves, and milk from actual containers were aboard USS Intrepid. A seaman named Robert Hicks from Terre Haute, Indiana, later wrote that his first breakfast aboard was the best meal he had eaten since leaving home. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and orange juice. He ate it in 1943. He would not see that combination again until 1945. After fresh stores ran out, the menu rotated on a 21-day cycle, becoming as familiar to the crew as their own names. Powdered eggs reconstituted with water and cooked on industrial griddles produced a yellow, technically edible substance, bearing no other resemblance to eggs. Powdered milk mixed into a thin, faintly sweet liquid settled strangely on the stomach. Canned vegetables, green beans, corn, peas, carrots, rotated so that within a month you had eaten each of them a dozen times. Spam, called canned meat product in Navy supply manifests, appeared so frequently that men developed a private, lifelong hostility toward it. Galleys operated in 110-degree heat on the lower decks. Cooks worked 14-hour days to feed 3,400 men across 6 meal sittings. Tropical conditions affected everything. Bread mold appeared within 36 hours of baking. Refrigeration units failed regularly under the strain of the climate and operational demands on the ship's electrical systems. Meat stored improperly developed a smell disguised with whatever seasoning was available, and served anyway because there was nothing else. Inspecting your food before eating became habit, not paranoia. Weevils appeared in the flour stores consistently by the third week of extended deployments. Standard practice among bakers was to sift flour twice before use and then proceed regardless because flour was not optional. The alternative was no bread at all. Men ate bread with weevil fragments for months. Most did not comment after the first few weeks. The physical layout of the ship created a geography of experience that differed radically depending on assignment. Officers lived in staterooms in the island, and gallery deck spaces still cramped by any reasonable standard. 2 or 3 men to a compartment, but with an actual door, a surface to write at, and a light that could be switched on without disturbing 30 sleeping men. Flag officers and the captain had private cabins. These were not luxurious. The captain's sea cabin on an Essex-class carrier measured approximately 12 by 14 feet. But it was private and privacy. Aboard a ship of 3,400 men was a form of wealth more valuable than any pay differential. The division between officers and enlisted men aboard a carrier was not principally about comfort. Though comfort differed, it was about agency. An officer had a professional identity aboard the ship: gunnery officer, air officer, executive officer, and with that identity came narrative control over his situation. He understood the overall picture, received briefings, knew the operational schedule. An enlisted man knew his battle station, his watch schedule, and what was directly in front of him at any given moment. He did not know when the ship would return to port, or the next operational objective, or why, on a particular Tuesday, he was suddenly called to battle stations for a threat that never materialized. He was inside the machine without access to its instrument panel. This produced a psychological condition. The Navy's 1944 operational fatigue study noted, but did not adequately analyze a form of institutionalized helplessness that wore on men over months of deployment more steadily than any individual danger. You could not change anything. You could not know anything beyond your immediate environment. You ate what appeared, worked when ordered, slept when possible, and waited for information that might never come. Men in this condition, documented across multiple carrier crew interviews in the 70s and 80s, described losing track of time in a fundamental way. Within the first 3 weeks of extended deployment, the days ceased to differentiate themselves. Routine consumed the calendar. Men who could tell you precisely what date it was on their first day at sea frequently could not tell you within a week. The flight deck was something else entirely. On an Essex-class carrier in the Pacific, it was simultaneously the most critical operational space on the ship and the most brutally hostile environment American sailors encountered in any theater during flight operations. It was a coordinated ballet of organized violence conducted on a moving platform in any weather the Pacific chose to produce. Dozens of aircraft, Hellcats, Avengers, Dauntlesses, Corsairs were spotted, fueled, armed, launched, recovered, rearmed, refueled, and launched again in cycles that ran sometimes for 18 consecutive hours without pause. The flight deck crew, the plane handlers in yellow jerseys, the fueling crews in purple, the ordnance men in red, the catapult operators in green, the plane directors waving aircraft into position, worked in an environment where the consequence of a mistake was measured in immediate physical catastrophe. The deck itself was a hazard. Steel, non-skid plating heated by tropical sun burned through the soles of standard-issue shoes. Jet wash from aircraft engines at full power created wind forces that could lift an unwary sailor off the deck. Propeller arcs were invisible. At speed, a spinning 3-bladed propeller on an F-6F Hellcat turned at 2,700 revolutions per minute. The blur was indistinguishable from empty air at more than 18 inches distance. Men died this way. Not rarely. A 1944 Bureau of Medicine and Surgery study of carrier operational casualties found that 31% of flight deck fatalities during non-combat flight operations resulted from propeller strikes, followed by arresting wire incidents at 24% and falls overboard at 18%. These were deaths that happened when nothing was going wrong, when the ship was not under attack, when the only enemy was the machinery itself. Arresting wires, 7 cables stretched across the F section of the flight deck to catch the tail hook of returning aircraft operated under extraordinary tension. Each wire, an 1.25-inch steel cable, was rated to absorb the kinetic energy of a 10,000-pound aircraft landing at 85 knots, bringing it to a stop in approximately 150 feet. When a wire parted under load, it could sever a limb at the point of contact. Wire failures were documented across multiple carriers throughout the war. On USS Lexington II in late 1943, a parted wire during recovery operations struck Plane Director Petty Officer 2nd Class James Calloway across both legs below the knee. He was 23 years old. He survived, but did not return to the flight deck. Ordnance crews worked with materials requiring a specific mental discipline. A single 500-pound general-purpose bomb weighed 512 pounds and contained 262 pounds of trinitol explosive. A Mark 13 aerial torpedo weighed 2,216 pounds and carried a 600-pound Torpex warhead. Aviation gasoline was stored in the ship's fuel tanks below the hangar deck in quantities typically exceeding 300,000 gallons. The combination of high explosives, high-energy propellants, and aviation fuel within a steel hull produced a theoretical catastrophe of almost unlimited magnitude. The men who worked magazines, bomb hoists, and fueling stations knew this. They followed procedures developed through systematic analysis of every carrier accident and combat loss to minimize the probability of ignition, and then the probability found them anyway. This is where the institutional gap between official doctrine and documented reality reveals itself most completely. The Navy's pre-war carrier damage control doctrine assumed that fire aboard a carrier would be localized, containable, and addressable by trained damage control teams using available equipment within 30 minutes of ignition. The doctrine specified response times, suppression methods, and acceptable casualty thresholds for each category of shipboard fire. It was a coherent document based on peacetime accident data and engineering projections. It did not account for conditions produced by combat. USS Franklin CV 13 was operating 50 miles off the coast of Japan on March 19, 1945, when a single Japanese aircraft, a D-4Y Judy dive bomber, penetrated the combat air patrol undetected in low clouds and released 2 550-pound semi-armor-piercing bombs from approximately 700 feet. Both bombs struck the flight deck. The first penetrated to the gallery deck and detonated. The second struck the aft section of the flight deck, where a dozen Corsairs and Avengers were spotted for a strike launch, their fuel tanks full, their weapons loaded. Bombs already armed on those aircraft, tiny Tim rockets, 500-pound bombs. Aerial torpedoes began cooking off in the fire within 90 seconds of the initial impact. The Navy's damage control doctrine specified a 30-minute window to contain a shipboard fire. Franklin's flight deck was not a scenario. It was a continuous detonation sequence lasting from 0 to 7 until after 11. Nearly 4 hours of exploding ordnance and burning aviation fuel aboard a ship, the crew was simultaneously trying to save and survive. Of the 3,448 men aboard Franklin that morning, 724 were killed, another 265 wounded. The ship lost steerage, lost propulsion temporarily, and drifted to within 52 miles of the Japanese mainland, closer than any other surviving American carrier came to the Japanese home islands during the war. The crew who stayed aboard, most of whom could have abandoned ship under naval regulations, chose to fight the fires. Chaplain Lieutenant Commander Joseph O'Callaghan moved through the burning ship, administering last rites, leading firefighting teams and directing men away from ammunition about to detonate. He was later awarded the Medal of Honor. The ship was saved. She never returned to combat. Franklin was extreme. What was not extreme was the context that produced her. Between November 1944 and August 1945, Japanese kamikaze attacks struck American carriers with enough frequency and consistency that the Navy eventually acknowledged the formal doctrine problem. Essex-class carriers, designed for conventional bomb and torpedo attacks, were not built to absorb damage from an aircraft carrying 550 pounds of explosive and 800 gallons of aviation. Fuel striking a flight deck full of armed and fueled aircraft while traveling 350 miles per hour. The original Essex design had a single layer of armored deck plating at 1.5 inches of special treatment steel over the hangar deck. British fleet carriers of the illustrious class carried 3-inch armored flight decks. The difference was philosophical. American planners in 1940 had prioritized aircraft capacity over armor, calculating that air superiority would prevent enemy aircraft from reaching the carrier. By 1945, with kamikazes coming through combat air patrols in clouds, at wave-top altitude, and from every compass heading, that calculation had been overtaken by events. Men below decks during an attack experienced something that deserves its own accounting. General quarters sounded at any hour. The alarm, a klaxon penetrating every space in the ship, including the lowest berthing compartments where men were sleeping after night watches. You had your battle station. You moved to it, regardless of where you were or what you had been doing. All watertight doors and hatches in affected sections were secured, dogged down, sealed. Men inside were locked in. Compartmentalization was doctrine, intended to prevent localized catastrophe from becoming total loss. The consequence was brutal. If you were in a compartment on the wrong side of a watertight door when a bomb or kamikaze struck, you were trapped. You could hear the guns through steel, feel the vibration of 40mm mounts hammering above, 5-inch guns producing concussive shocks that traveled through every structural member. Men described it as being inside a steel drum while someone beat it with a sledgehammer. Lights flickered with each firing. Loose equipment shifted. The ship heeled through high-speed turns. Everything not secured moved. Impact, if it came, arrived as both sound and physical shock simultaneously. Men who survived multiple hits described a specific phenomenon. The initial explosion was almost not the worst part. It was the secondary detonations, ammunition cooking off, aviation fuel igniting, successive blasts consuming each stored quantity of explosives. The lights went out. Emergency lighting came on dim red. Ventilation stopped. Air in a sealed compartment with 30 men began running out of oxygen and accumulating carbon dioxide at a rate producing headaches within 20 minutes and serious cognitive impairment within 40. Smoke from adjacent compartments seeped through gaskets and cable penetrations, regardless of hatch security. Night operations that became standard in the latter half of the Pacific War added another dimension of danger, compressed in official accounts into tactical summaries without adequately conveying what they demanded from men executing them. Night carrier landings, bringing an aircraft onto a moving ship deck in total darkness, using only a thin line of deck-edge lighting and instructions from a landing signal officer working by flashlight, were sufficiently hazardous that the Navy established dedicated night carrier air groups specifically trained for the task. The Night Carrier Air Group, operating from USS Independence through late 1944 and early 1945, documented its operational loss rate in post-war records. Of 47 aircraft and pilots flying night combat, 11 aircraft and pilots were lost to operational causes, crashes on landing, disorientation, fuel exhaustion compared to 4 lost to enemy action. The dark killed at nearly 3 times the rate of the Japanese. Yet night operations were essential. Japanese surface forces moved primarily at night. The carrier's aircraft were the only weapons capable of stopping them. Landing signal officers, standing at the aft edge of the flight deck with paddles, later illuminated wands, held a position of responsibility that the official rating system did not capture. Working a night recovery in a 15-knot crosswind on a pitching deck, guiding a pilot airborne for 6 hours and running low on fuel onto a deck, rising and falling 8 feet with each swell, required continuous real-time judgments about aircraft attitude, closure rate, and deck position. A single mistake could kill someone. LSOs aboard carrier after carrier reported that the psychological weight of this responsibility accumulated in ways that did not release when flight operations secured for the night. Carrier aviators themselves occupied a structurally separate and psychologically isolated position aboard the ship. They were the reason the ship existed. Everything else, the 3,400 men, the boilers, the fuel, the food, the guns, existed to put aircraft over targets. Pilots understood this. The ship's crew understood this. The relationship between air group and ship's company had mutual dependence, but a quality of incomprehension. Ship's crew rarely knew the pilots by name. Pilots rarely knew much about the men maintaining the ship that launched and recovered them. When a pilot did not return from a strike, the air group processed this in its own way. His berth emptied, possessions inventoried for return to family. His wingman wrote a letter if he survived. The ship continued flight operations. No ceremony occurred during operational tempo. During the strikes on the Philippine Islands in October 1944 and on the Japanese home islands in July 1945, the operational pace allowed almost no time between loss and continuation. You lost someone. You flew again the next day. The Navy's attrition rate among carrier aviators across the Pacific War deserves specific attention because it is frequently understated. Of approximately 14,000 pilots who flew combat operations from fleet carriers between December 7, 1941 and August 15, 1945, roughly 2,900 were killed in combat, and approximately 1,700 were lost to operational accidents, crashes, ditching at sea, equipment failures, weather. By mid-1944, most pilots flying from fleet carriers were not the men who had flown from those same carriers a year earlier. The average combat experience level of a carrier air group's pilots, measured in hours of operational flying time, actually declined between mid-1943 and mid-1944, as losses were replaced by graduates of accelerated training programs. Inexperienced pilots flying complex aircraft from moving ships in combat conditions produced predictable results. Accident statistics from 1944 reflect this, with clarity that official reports did not advertise. Medical facilities aboard a carrier were designed for the ship's peacetime complement and peacetime casualty assumptions. Sick bay aboard an Essex-class carrier was staffed by 2 medical officers and 6 hospital corpsmen, with 24 treatment bays sufficient for routine injuries and illness among a crew of 2,631. When 393 men were killed or wounded in a single engagement, the sick bay was no longer a medical facility. It became a triage point. Medical officers made decisions about who received immediate treatment based on survivability, not severity. Men assessed as unlikely to survive with available resources were set aside, given morphine, and whatever comfort was possible. This happened. It is documented in multiple action reports. The Navy's official casualty statistics for carrier operations from 1942 through 1945 recorded 5,087 officers and enlisted men killed in action aboard fleet and light carriers. Operational accident deaths, recorded separately, added another 2,341. The wounded total across all carriers exceeded 14,000. There was no rotation off the ship during a deployment. You were aboard until the ship returned to port. A typical Western Pacific deployment in 1944 and 1945 ran between 90 and 120 days at sea. Carrier replenishment at sea capability meant the ship did not need to return for logistical reasons. The crew of USS Essex during the strikes on the Japanese home islands in July and August of 1945 had been at sea for 92 continuous days. When the war ended, the psychological effects of this sustained operation were documented and largely ignored. The Navy's Bureau of Medicine and Surgery began studying what it called operational fatigue in carrier crews in 1944, prompted by increases in reported accidents and errors not explained by equipment failures or inadequate training. Sleep deprivation at this level produced specific documented effects, identified in Navy medical studies from 1944 and 1945. In carrier crews, reaction time degraded measurably after 72 hours of restricted sleep. Error rates in mechanical procedures increased by factors quantified in the studies, yet command leadership was reluctant to act because there was no operational alternative. The aircraft needed to fly, the deck needed to be manned, the boilers needed to run. Men worked past the point where medical studies said they were operating at any reasonable fraction of their trained capacity, and they did this not for a day or a week, but for months at a time. Fatigue operated as its own force aboard these ships, separate from danger and discomfort. With its own timeline and effects, flight operations during major strikes began at 0 to 4:30 and ran with the deck respotted and reloaded between cycles until late afternoon. The launch cycle for a major strike involved the entire air department, spotting aircraft, running engines, launching at 30-second intervals. Recovery cycles required equally intense coordination. A pilot flying a strike to target and back was airborne for 5 to 6 hours. The plane captain maintaining that aircraft had been on deck since 0 to 300. The ordnance crew loading bombs had worked through the previous night. A full operational day during a major strike series, following extended deployments, found that 34% of enlisted men and 28% of officers reported symptoms consistent with what would now be recognized as combat stress reactions, hypervigilance, sleep disruption, even when sleep was available, inability to concentrate, and a phenomenon described as detachment from personal survival concerned men who had stopped caring whether they lived or died. The Navy classified the study and continued operations at the same pace. Recommendations regarding mandatory rest rotations and crew relief schedules were acknowledged but not implemented. The men adapted in ways that adaptation does not fully cover. They developed a specific fatalism, different from despair. Men who had been through multiple kamikaze attacks described a restructuring of their internal experience of danger. The first attack produced terror. The second produced controlled fear. By the third and fourth, many described almost clinical detachment during the engagement itself, a narrowing of attention to the immediate task. Man the gun. Pass the ammunition. Fight the fire. Stay at your station. Emotional response arrived later. When the dead were counted and burned sections of the ship were being cleaned, the emotion came. Men who had functioned perfectly during the attack found themselves unable to stop shaking an hour afterward. Some could not eat for days. Some could not sleep. None were offered anything resembling psychological support. You reported to your division officer if you felt unable to perform duties. You reported to your station. Survivors returned home to farms in Iowa, factories in Ohio, offices in New York, hardware stores in Georgia. They did not talk about it in most cases. Civilian life provided no context. The culture did not provide permission to describe it. Some drank. Some developed a remoteness that never fully went away. A few wrote decades later, old enough for events to feel historical and discussable. Post-war institutional changes tell their own story. The Navy's carrier design program incorporated a 3.5-inch armored flight deck that wartime Essex-class carriers had lacked. Hangar deck fire suppression systems were redesigned, moving from carbon dioxide smothering systems that had proven inadequate to high-velocity fog systems, saturating a burning hangar space with fine water droplets within seconds of ignition. Aviation fuel systems were redesigned to use fuel less volatile than the avgas that had made every carrier in the Pacific a potential catastrophe. These changes were enacted because existing designs had failed under conditions pre-war planners had not anticipated. The price of failure was measured in 5,087 officers and men killed in action aboard carriers, plus 2,341 operational deaths, plus 14,000 wounded, plus the 3 carriers that went to the bottom, and dozens more requiring months in shipyards to rebuild. The Navy revised its doctrine, but it did not revise the official characterization. The queens of the fleet remained the queens of the fleet. The steel decks, the 142-degree boiler rooms, the weevils in the flour, the 40 minutes in the dark with 11 other men, listening to ammunition cook off through bulkheads, those details went into personal memories, largely staying there. The men who crewed carriers during the decisive campaigns of 1944 and 1945 understood themselves to be part of something historically significant. The significance was not abstract. You launched aircraft that sank ships. You maintained engines keeping the flight deck operational. You handled ordnance destroying targets. The relationship between individual labor and strategic outcome was shorter and more visible aboard a carrier than in almost any other form of military service. A boilerman in Boiler Room 4 knew the steam he tended was turning propellers moving the ship into the wind that launched aircraft attacking Japan. The chain was unbroken. You were in it. This did not make 142-degree air more breathable. It did not cool the berthing compartments. It did not replace the men who died in the fires. One of them was aviation machinist's mate second class, Elmer Dunn of Wooster, Ohio. Dunn was 20 years old when he reported aboard USS Bunker Hill in January 1945. He was assigned to the Air Department, specifically maintaining TBF Avenger torpedo bombers in VT-84. On May 11, 1945, he was in the hangar deck when the first kamikaze struck above. The fireball came through the forward elevator opening, driving him and 11 other men into a maintenance bay on the port side of the hangar. The hatch could be dogged from the inside. Dunn dogged it. He and the 11 men waited in the dark. Lights failed immediately. The fire burned outside. They could hear ammunition cooking off. They could feel the heat through steel. 40 minutes passed before a damage control team opened the hatch from the outside. 11 survived. 1 died of smoke inhalation. His name was Aviation Ordnance Man 3rd Class Donald Pfeiffer of Cleveland, Ohio. He was 19 years old. Dunn carried Pfeiffer's name with him for the rest of his life. In a letter to Pfeiffer's family in 1987, 42 years later, he described it as something he never put down. Dunn returned to Worcester after the war and worked 31 years as a mechanic at a Chevrolet dealership on East Liberty Street. He attended Bunker Hill Survivors Association reunions every year from 1955 until 2003. When his health prevented further travel, he died in 2009 at age 84. The last entry in his personal log from the war, written on August 15, 1945, the day Japan surrendered, was a list of 41 names, the men from his division who did not come home. No other words, just the names.